Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Jiraiya challenged Naruto to write a novel? Part 3. The memorial stone looked nearly the same every time he saw it. His one visible eye glossed over most of the names on it, usually only really focusing on 3 names in particular. The names of his 2 teammates from his Genin squad, Obito and Rin, and his sensei Minato. His eyes shut and curved upward, signaling that he was smiling beneath his mask. Remembering the good times he had with his team helped him numb the pain he felt from losing them. Some days were harder than others, but he managed as best as he could. He opened his eye back up and continued skimming through the names. Considering he was there practically every day he was in the village, he knew most of the names on the stone even if he didn't know all of the ninjas personally. There's a new name on here, he thought to himself somberly. He recognized the name, too. A young Chunin no older than 17 had recently died on a low-tier B-rank mission. Apparently, some bandits who had access to jutsu got the jump on him and the convoy he was escorting. There were reportedly no survivors and the culprits were still at large. He closed his eye and stood still, giving the fallen soldier his due respect in a moment of silence. While it was sad that someone so young had lost their life, he had done it while representing his village. There was honor in that. When do they have the time to carve the names into this? I'm here all the time and I never see anyone else ever around. He wondered, trying to take his mind off of the sad thoughts that come along with visiting the memorial. He looked up at the sky. It was early afternoon and the sun was shining brightly. Hardly a day to stand gloomily at a stone all day, but he had to come and pay his respects to his friends. What kind of person would he be if he didn't? It was his day off, so he was able to come early and had stayed there for several hours. Normally, he would stay even longer, but something was telling him to walk around the village a little bit today. Yeah, that sounded like a good idea. A nice change of scenery would bring his spirits up a little. With one final look at the tribute to the fallen, he turned around and pulled a book out of his hip pouch. The book seemed to be quite worn down. Nothing like reading Ika Ika Innocence for what had to be the 50th time. The pure love depicted in it captures his attention every time he reads it. However, as much as he loved the first 3 books, he was anxiously awaiting the 4th installment in Jiraiya's masterpiece of a series. He hoped that it would be out in stores before his student and the author returned from their training expedition. Periodically, he would stop by the local bookstore and ask if they had heard anything about a new Ika Ika novel. Each time he was met with disappointment. As improbable as a nearby release was, he had to cover all of his bases. I haven't been there in a while, couldn't hurt to pop in and ask. He thought to himself, giddy about the potential good news. As he was making his way through town, his mind drifted to his blonde student. Naruto crossed Kakashi's mind every day. While he was supremely confident in the abilities of Jiraiya to protect the boy from any danger, he still sometimes worried that something bad might happen. Every time he got called into an audience with the Hokage he tensed up, hoping that he wasn't going to hear some bad news. It never was, but that didn't keep him from worrying the next time. I wonder what you have been up to, Naruto. He mused as he rounded the last street corner. He glanced up from his book and had to do a double take. There was a line going out of the store. The only time he had ever seen that was when a new Ika Ika book came out. How the Leaf Village adults loved the Sanin's work. His pace quickened, excitement visible in his exposed eye. Would today of all days be the one where he gets his hands on it? That feeling was soon dashed and replaced with confusion. He had been expecting the line to be filled with men his age and older. People who could appreciate the contents of one of Jiraiya's books. But this line had children in it. More importantly, children that he knew. Sakura. He began as he walked up halfway up the side of the line. The aforementioned pink-hair Kunoichi turned around upon hearing her name, along with Hinata, Neji, and Rock Lee. What are you guys doing here? The copy ninja asked as he leaned in close to them. This book isn't something you should be reading. His voice now a whisper. Kakashi's student edged her head to the side in apparent confusion. What are you talking about, sensei? The other genin shared a similar look. Except for Neji. Neji looked the same as he always did, uninterested in everything going on around him. Why shouldn't I be allowed to read Naruto's book? Huh, was the only response the usually cool and collected Jonin could muster. Upon hearing his perplexed response, Sakura pointed to a sign placed next to the door of the bookstore that Kakashi had missed. Sure enough, it was an advertisement for his knucklehead of student's new novel, The Weight of the World. Naruto, our Naruto, wrote a book. The Sharingan user sputtered out, still in a state of disbelief. That's what I said, Sakura agreed, but Hinata told me that he had a book coming out. Don't you have to get something like that published? How do you think he managed something like that? The kunoichi was going a mile a minute. She had thought she calmed down about the situation after Hinata told her, but seeing Kakashi caused her to start back up again. The Naruto she knew could barely write a coherent sentence, yet now he was coming out with a professionally published work. It didn't make any sense, but nonetheless, she had to read it. Not only to support her good friend but also because she was overwhelmingly curious about the contents of the book. Is it good? Bad? What is it about? She had to get the answers to all of these important questions. I have no earthly idea. The masked Jonin said while he sheepishly scratched the back of his neck. He turned to the quiet Hyuga. How did you hear about this? He asked with genuine curiosity. Any information he can glean about the situation would help him process what was going on. The shy girl, seemingly unprepared for any questions to be directed at her, blushed and began to twiddle her fingers uncomfortably. I overheard some people mention something about it. She said slowly. The chat had been between a man who worked at the bookstore and a friend of his. In passing, he mentioned the author's name being Uzumaki. The second anything Naruto related is said aloud, the little Hyuga's sense goes into overdrive. She then rushed to confirm the validity of what her ears had picked up. After seeing that it was actually true, she was filled with many indescribable emotions and there was only one thing on her mind at that point. She had to get her hands on a copy of that book. Yeah, Sakura jumped in, saving her friend from any further embarrassment. Hinata told as many people as she could. Team 10 is out on a mission, so they'll find out when they get back. Shino and Kiba had some sort of clan thing that they had to attend. And Tenten is working in her family's weapons shop, so I will bring her a copy, as requested. The green-clad genin who had surprisingly remained silent this entire time boomed. Tenten couldn't miss the chance to revel in Naruto's youthful storytelling. His eyes were set ablaze with a passion that Kakashi only saw elsewhere when he was hanging around Might Guy. He sweat dropped but acknowledged the taijutsu specialist's youth with a swift nod. If he was anything like Guy, if he enabled Lee with anything more than that, he would just keep talking about the prime of people's youth. And you, Neji? Kakashi turned to the only one of the four teenagers who remained silent. This doesn't seem like anything you'd be interested in. The Hyuga prodigy had an interesting relationship with the person that defeated him in the Chunin exams. That's why the copy ninja was curious about Neji's reasoning for being there. The pale-eyed Hyuga grimaced slightly. He had hoped he could get away from this conversation without saying anything. If you must know, I am interested in what Naruto has to say. What do you mean? Kakashi continued to prod. The name of the book. It piqued my interest, he said simply with a hint of finality. That was all he was going to say about the situation. Kakashi smiled with his eye. I agree, he concluded as he snapped his still open book closed with a soft thwack. I think I'll wait in line with you guys and get a copy for myself. Before any of the genin could say anything, someone began yelling. Hey, jerk, a man towards the back of the line said. If you plan on waiting in line, you better get to the back. He warned. No cutting. Kakashi, somewhat surprised at the outburst, smiled weakly and waved a hand out in front of himself in an attempt to defuse the situation. Sorry about that. He used his other hand to sheepishly scratch the back of his neck. He turned back to the students. Guess I'll be right behind you guys. See ya, he concluded as he began to walk towards the back of the line. He sighed. The line was now quite a bit longer than when he had initially arrived. Since I'll be here a while, he mused as he once again took out his precious Ika innocence. Having already read the book so many times, sometimes, although he would appear to be reading it, he was actually instead acutely aware of everything going on around. Sometimes he just liked to use the book as a tool to make himself unassuming, which gave him free rein to survey his surroundings. He was surprised by how many people were at this book release. While, yes, the Leaf Village did not have an as negative perception of the young author as they used to, there were still many within it that still viewed him as an unstable and dangerous monster. And by many, he meant most. It has been the blonde's actions that have been very slowly gaining the attention of some of the townspeople. From his mission in the Land of Waves to his heroic efforts during the Chunin exams, and lastly his role in bringing the 5th Hokage to the village in its time of need. All of these things seem to have convinced a couple of people of just who Naruto is. While he still has an arduous journey for the acceptance of the entire village, he is making small and important strides in that direction. And they, just like all of the boy's friends and loved ones, are curious to see what his novel is all about. If only you could see this for yourself, Naruto. I guess I should be more surprised than I am that you actually wrote a book. But I stopped counting you out a long time ago. That'll be 215 ryo. The polite shopkeeper said. Kakashi reached into his wallet and handed the man the necessary money. Accepting the money, he handed the Jonin a bag with the book his student authored. Enjoy. Have a nice day. Kakashi nodded and walked outside. Not exactly the book I was hoping to buy today, but this is definitely a pleasantly interesting surprise. He thought to himself as he reached into the bag. Upon seeing the book his sweat dropped. Really? Naruto. Bright orange, he said aloud humorlessly. At least it'll be an attention grabber. About time, sensei. The copy ninja looked up from his musing. The little genin had been waiting for him. Except, where did Hinata go? Hinata-sama seemed to be in a hurry after buying the book. As if she had to go somewhere important. Neji answered, slightly confused himself as to where the heiress rushed off to with such urgency. She's probably dying to read Naruto's book. Sakura said knowingly. It was beyond obvious that Hinata had feelings for the hyperactive blonde. Well, to everyone except the boy himself. But it is not going anywhere, right Sakura-chan? Lee asked with similar confusion to that of his teammate. Tsunade's disciple let out a big sigh. Well, to everyone except Naruto, Lee, and Neji. Today Lord Hiashi has instructed me to watch over Hinata. He began, he too, was about to leave. I must go find her. With a swift bow, he left in the direction of the Hyuga compound. Sakura chuckled. He might be dying to read the book too. She shrugged. I don't know, it's hard to read him sometimes. You are not dying to read it, Sakura-chan? Lee questioned. No, it's not that. Sakura waved off. I am, it's just they seem extra interested. Well, I for one am not going to take this sitting down. The busy-browed genin exclaimed. Huh, both Kakashi and his student blurted out dumbly. What was he talking about? This challenge that Naruto-kun has issued. His eyes were once again lit up fiercely with a blazing fire. While I cannot write a book myself, I will still accept the challenge. For every sentence that is in this book, I will do one push-up. And if I cannot do that, I will do one squat for every sentence, and if I cannot do that, all. I think we get the point, Lee. Kakashi said with a chuckle. I'm sure Naruto accepts your challenge. Upon hearing that response, the green-clad boy gave the two a passionate thumbs up with his trademark blindingly bright smile before running off towards the training grounds. Sakura and Kakashi had to shield their eyes so the boy's teeth didn't stun them. It took them a moment to recover, but once they did, teacher and student began walking down the busy streets of the Leaf Village. So, Sakura began. What do you think his book is about? She asked, waving around the bag containing the novel for added effect. Kakashi thought for a moment. If I know Naruto as well as I think I do, my first guess would be that it's about ramen. Most people would assume that he was joking, but he actually wasn't. Naruto really was that obsessed with noodles and broth. The pink-haired Kunoichi giggled fondly. I could definitely see Naruto dedicating an entire book to ramen. She looked at the title of her close friend's work. But not in this case. Her tone a little more even, one could even detect a trace of sadness in it. Yeah, Kakashi agreed, thinking the same thing as her. That title alone told them that this wasn't going to be a funny story about food. It was going to have more substance. To be honest, I think I'm more interested in how he was able to even write a book, Sakura said, apparently still not over how this was even possible. When he comes back, I'm gonna ask him how he did it. I'd be interested to hear that answer, too. Sakura smiled brightly. I'll see you later, Kakashi-sensei. She looked down at the book she was now clutching to her chest. I guess I'm going to go read a book by Naruto. She shuddered. Just saying the words alone felt so surreal she got a slight chill. Not that it was a bad thing, it was just so very strange. Kakashi nodded and watched his little student scamper off. Now he was all alone. I can't be the only one who's not reading it, he thought to himself as he opened the book to the first page. This book is dedicated to Team 7. My first family. His teacher's visible eye widened slightly. He focused in on those words for what felt like 10 minutes. He was fully aware that Naruto grew up with practically nothing. No family, no friends, no one besides the third Hokage he could actually spend any quality time with, and the third was always so busy that he didn't even get much of that. However, despite that, Naruto never complained about any of it to him or the other members of Team 7. The boy always wore the brave face, acting as if nothing ever bothered him. So he was surprised to see such introspective and emotional words. He probably didn't expect us to ever see this. He turned to the next page. Chapter 1. Isolation. Kakashi was stunned. Every word, every page, it felt as though what he was reading was coming to life right before his eyes. Well, now that he thought about it, it was coming to life in front of him. The main character, Menma, held very similar beliefs to his blonde students. They both were caring, optimistic, and confident. Along with their comparable backstories of being shunned and ostracized, it was clear where the author got his inspiration from. There is a key difference, though. Naruto, despite all of his hardships, puts on that impenetrable brave face all of the time. He never wants people to see how he is truly feeling. But in the story, we see all of Menma's struggles. The pressures that are continuously stacking on his shoulders, the sadness his past has left him with, and the loneliness he feels all of the time. All of these factors, plus the antagonists who are trying to steal the very power that has caused him to be isolated, affect his mind. Simply put, an imperfect hero. It's as if this novel is giving us an all-access pass into Naruto's psyche. The copy ninja thought to himself with a touch of sadness. I always knew he had to be dealing with a lot, but I never knew it was to this extent. I wonder if he was even consciously aware that he made a hero so much like himself. Kakashi blinked, then took in his surroundings. It was dark. So dark, in fact, that the streetlights were on, illuminating the dim streets of the village. How long have I been walking around? The usually hyper-aware Jonin thought to himself, slightly shocked at how enthralled he had been in his reading. If he was being completely honest, the masked ninja didn't have high expectations for the book's quality of writing. After all, his student had, by far, the lowest academic tests results in the academy, sans Shikamaru, and that was only because the spiky-haired youth fell asleep during half of his tests. In short, Naruto should have no business writing as well as he does. So that begs the question. What kind of training is Master Jiraiya putting him through? Early this morning, Jiraiya kneeled next to the body and grimaced. While he had expected the worst when Naki hadn't shown up for their meeting, the scene before him left him slightly baffled. The sage was no detective, but there was obviously a break-in and a subsequent struggle. The door had been busted down. He looked around the room, noting the deep slashes on the walls and floors. Then at the deceased man's arms and face. Wounds he got probably from struggling when being held down. All of that was pretty normal for this kind of crime scene. There was only one thing that sent chills up his spine. Naki's heart was gone. That could be chalked up as animals coming in through the broken down door to eat the corpse, but they wouldn't take just the heart. This doesn't make any sense. Why would someone take his heart? Another thing that concerned the Sannin was the fact that someone had managed to kill Naki. The man was a strong Jonin who specialized in water jutsu, infiltration, and stealth. To be able to just charge through the door and defeat him in his environment was a very tall task. Whoever this was, they were very skilled. At least high A, possibly S rank level. He noticed some trace amounts of water droplets on the floor and the walls of the room. Naki probably tried to fend them off with his jutsu. Glancing over at the bookcase in the corner of the room, he took note that the books did not appear to be wet or damp. Looks like they didn't give him much opportunity to go on the defensive. Based on the state of the body, Jiraiya concluded that all of this had to have happened a couple days ago. With the door destroyed, No one came to check to see if everything was okay. They had to have heard the struggle. Looks like he had some neighbors to question. While stepping outside, in the corner of his eye something moved. He looked in that direction and saw that someone had shut their blinds swiftly. Oh, so I'm being watched. You have to do a better job than that. Don't make it so obvious. Thinking to himself, I guess I have my first volunteer. The sage mused as he walked over to the house that held the person who was trying to hide from him. He knocked on the door. Sighing, he knocked once more. I know you're in there. I saw you watching me through the window. He said just loud enough that whoever was in the house would hear him clearly. If you don't answer, I'm just going to take this door down. He stated as he began knocking on the door for what he deemed was the last time. Jiraiya didn't have time for this. He began gathering chakra into his palm to form the Rasengan. Just as he was about to blow the door down, the lock clicked. Dissipating his attack, he waited patiently as the door slowly opened, revealing a bald middle-aged man with a thick beard. He looked scared. Please don't hurt me. The man blurted out before the Sannin could say anything. His body was trembling, and it almost seemed as if the door he was holding onto was the only thing that was keeping him from collapsing to the ground. Whatever this stranger had seen, it had clearly rattled him. I'm not here to hurt you, Jiraiya said, trying his best to sound as reassuring as he possibly could. I just need to know if you saw anything. He continued, gesturing towards the house of the deceased informant. The bearded man stayed quiet, seemingly trying to determine whether or not he trusted the stranger who came knocking on his door. Please, the sage continued, the man who lived there, he was a friend of mine. We were supposed to meet earlier this morning, but when he never showed up, I figured something bad must have happened to him. Did you see anything that could help me find out who did this? He asked genuinely. The bald man suddenly collapsed against the door, unable to withstand the strain it took to stand. As the Leaf Jonin did his best to help him get to his feet, he noticed something. This poor man's right leg, from the knee down, was gone. Cut clean from his body. What was worse was that this relatively fresh wound didn't appear to have been tended to by a medical professional. It was taped and wrapped sloppily, clearly by someone with no medical experience. He had probably tried to dress it himself. Jiraiya, now unofficially invited into this victim's house, helped him sit down in a nearby chair. They'll kill me if I do, he finally said after a long stretch of petrified silence. Whoever had dismembered this person was also the one who had killed Naki. This Jiraiya knew. Seems like they didn't want any witnesses. And if there was only one person that saw them kill Naki, scaring him into not talking was a better option than killing him outright. That could have attracted even more attention. That's why they cut off his leg. Something felt off to Naruto's master. This all seemed like too much of a coincidence. The Akatsuki being spotted relatively close to where he and his ward were. Not only that, but in a place where they were planning on going to soon. We're separated right now. And Naki, what if his death was used as a distraction to keep me here? Something in his brain suddenly clicked. Naruto, he yelled aloud, startling the fragile man. He looked back at the wounded man, his eyes were now desperate. Please, you have to tell me who these people were. My godson might be in danger. He was frantic. This guy needed to cooperate with him. However, before answering, he just stared at his leg. The two monsters who came promised to do much worse if they had to come back. He couldn't bring himself to open his mouth, too petrified by the fear of death. Jiraiya tried his best to calm down. As desperate as he was, he couldn't bring himself to harm an innocent person who had already been made into a victim. Please, just tell me this. He began, hopeful that he would be able to get just enough information to confirm or deny his fears. Does the person who did this to you wear a black cloak with blood-red clouds? The bearded stranger recoiled at the description as if he didn't want to remember that terrible cloak himself. He stared Jiraiya in the eyes, lip quivering, and gave him a weak nod. That was all he could muster. The sage's eyes widened, his worst fear coming to life right before his eyes. He whipped a scroll and pen out of his pocket and began to furiously scribble. I have to tell Tsunade what's going on. They might be able to send backup if I need it. He glanced down at the scared man who was still able to help him even if it meant signing his own death sentence. And I can ask her if we can grant him asylum in the leaf. Now finished writing his message to the Hokage, he wrapped the scroll up and bit his thumb hard enough to draw blood. Summoning Jutsu. Poof. A tiny red and blue toad with goggles around his neck appeared. What is it, Jiraiya? He asked, prepared to speed off at a moment's notice. Kosuke, I need you to take this to Tsunade as fast as you can. My student is probably in danger. No time for talking, the toad named Kosuke grabbed the letter and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Good, he'll go back to MT Myoboku and then use the well that will take him right outside the village. He turned to the man that helped him. Thank you so much. He thanked with a bow. I asked the Hokage if she could give you asylum in the Leaf Village. Just keep the door locked and don't let anyone else in until Leaf Ninja arrives to get you. Before the man could get out any words of gratitude to thank the odd stranger, Jiraiya disappeared in a plume of smoke. He blinked in confusion. A wave of memories flooded back to the real Jiraiya, who had already been speeding through the forest towards the land of waves. He gritted his teeth in anger at what his clone had learned and immediately sped up to his maximum. He had a bad feeling about the entire situation, so when Naki didn't meet up with him, he decided going back to regroup with his student would be the best choice. Naki was so reliable that him not showing up most likely meant he was already dead, meaning that leaving a clone behind to collect evidence was more efficient than going himself. Having just learned what his copy had uncovered, he was beyond grateful that he made the correct choice. Akatsuki. He growled in a low, threatening voice. You had better not lay a hand on Minato's son, or you'll regret it. All three set of eyes were now completely transfixed on the new arrival. The tension could be sliced by a butter knife. It was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Jiraiya, however, had no interest in any of that at the moment. His eyes were too busy scanning the area for his ward. Where is he? The sage broke the silence that had fallen over the battling shinobi. With the one named Hidan distracted by the arrival of the Leaf's most powerful ninja, Yudo suddenly ripped himself from his grasp. As he was leaping away, he undid the jutsu that was concealing the young blonde. He was still lifeless. Hidan sneered, ripping out the tanto that was still buried in his chest. Jiraiya was so overcome with worry that he didn't even register that Tsunade had assigned the Leaf's only wood-style user to protect Naruto. Noticing this, the mystery shinobi was quick to calm him down. He's not hurt. He tried to reassure. He's just been through a lot. Yudo finished as he picked the boy up and slung him over his shoulder. Kakuzu, using this conversation as a way to get the jump on his opponent, used his free hand to aim a punch at his opponent's face. Jiraiya, still looking away, simply leaned to the side, allowing the punch to fly harmlessly past him. Anger flaring up once more, he wrenched Kakuzu's wrist back, hell-bent on snapping it in two. The deep-voiced Akatsuki member remained silent but grimaced behind his mask. He went for a leg sweep but was taken off guard when Jiraiya threw a swift knee to his gut, forcing him down to one knee. The Sannin didn't notice his opponent's free hand turning a darker, almost black, color. Just as Jiraiya was aiming an elbow to the back of his head, Kakuzu swiped down, severing the part of the tree branch that Jiraiya had been standing on. Slightly surprised, Naruto's mentor was forced to let go of the masked man's hand as he began freefalling. He landed lightly on the ground, a scowl adorning his lips. Hidan, seeing his opportunity, rushed him from behind. He pulled out a small black rod that extended into a spear-like weapon. He slashed at his target. Poof! He stumbled forward. Another substitution. Hidan yelled angrily. Where did he go? Rasengan! Jiraiya exclaimed as he slammed his blue, spherical jutsu into the unsuspecting criminal's back. Hidan let out a startled yelp and was sent spiraling away from the force of the jutsu. Kakuzu dropped down from the trees, landing next to his partner, once again holding the dismembered head of the bridge builder. Get up, Hidan. Shut the hell up, Kakuzu. That really hurt, you know. Master Jiraiya, the wood-style user began. The one you just hit with your jutsu, I don't know if it's some cheap trick or not, but I think he might be immortal. He sounded like he didn't even believe it himself. He was stabbed twice in the chest, and not only does he seem fine, but those wounds are healed. Jiraiya nodded, noticing the necklace the strange man wore. I've heard of something like this. A cult, calling themselves the Way of Jashin. They claim that through their adherence to their insane religion, by way of rituals including human sacrifice and mass murder, the followers can gain access to an ability similar to immortality. He remained quiet for a minute, seemingly trying to remember more details. From what I recall, there were rumors that they had one successful case. Although, again, that was just a rumor I heard from one of my informants in the hot water village. Naki. Yudo shuddered but nodded. I see. 500 million. Jiraiya's eyes shifted back to the shorter one. That's how much the bounty on your head is, did you know that? The sage didn't answer. Now I can see in person why it's so high. His eyes drifted back to the ninja he was fighting before the Sannin's arrival. And an incredibly rare wood-style user, too. His eyes narrowed menacingly. It enrages me that I won't be able to collect your bounties today. Together, you two would net me north of 800 million. I'll have to settle for this. Gesturing to the head he was holding. A pity, really. Jiraiya scoffed. And who said I was just going to let you walk away? If I killed you two right now, that's two less Akatsuki trash to worry about. Hidan, scythe once again in hand, brandished it menacingly. However, he was quickly cut off by his more calculating partner. You wouldn't want to endanger the boy there. He pointed to Naruto with his free hand. Sure, you could let the wood user scurry off to safety, but then you run the risk of there being more of us close by. If there were more of you, they'd be here by now. Jiraiya countered. Perhaps. Kakuzu's poker face was perfect, he was unreadable. Then again, even if it was just only us and he gets away, are you that confident that you could defeat both of us at the same time? It was a verbal and mental chess match, and both were experts in it. With very limited knowledge of what our abilities are, is that the best move? Sounds to me like you're bluffing. The sage challenged back. I'm right here if you want to fight. In actuality, both were bluffing. Neither wanted to fight the other, except for maybe Hidan. Jiraiya, being outnumbered and unaware of the fighting abilities of his opponents, knew that it would be unwise to engage in combat. While there was a good possibility he would win, did he want to run that risk when Naruto needed him more than ever right now? No, he couldn't. As for Kakuzu, he was warned by his leader to retreat if the Sannin somehow managed to show his face. That, coupled with the reputation of the man he was staring down with, made him reluctant to make an aggressive move. Even if there were two of them to his one. Meanwhile, Hidan was doing his best to keep quiet. Even he knew when it wasn't his time to butt in. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to capture the 9 tails. Kakuzu warned, his free hand coming up to form the ram seal. There's no reason for us to fight today, Jiraiya of the Sannin. The two partners disappeared in a plume of smoke, leaving the 3-leaf ninja by themselves. The tension in the air receded, and Yudo found himself taking in a large gulp of air. He hadn't even realized he had forgotten to breathe. Even a powerful ninja like him felt useless when compared to 3S-level powerhouses. Now that the threat was gone, the teacher could turn his attention back to his student. He's catatonic, he said to himself aloud. What happened to him? He was confident he wouldn't like the answer. The head that Akatsuki was holding, he was a dear friend of Naruto-san. He had been staying with a family of 3 that he had met when they liberated this land from Gato. I believe that the other 2 may very well be dead, as well. Jiraiya's shoulders slumped at the news. His pupil had been so excited to see these friends of his, and then this happens. With everything that has been swirling in the life and mind of the hunted Jinchuriki, this was another thing that a 12-year-old shouldn't have to deal with. I don't know how much more of this he can take, Minato. His thoughts were somber. I'll carry him, Jiraiya said. Yudo obliged and handed over the blonde, who was then placed on his mentor's back, piggyback style. Tsunade was smart to send you of all people to watch over Naruto. The mystery shinobi nodded. Indeed, although I didn't have to use it, my abilities can be used to suppress the 9 tails chakra. Although his face didn't show it, he was a little surprised at the Sannin's reaction. You seem to know of me, even though my existence is a well-guarded secret within the village. How? Well, I am close to Tsunade. The lecherous man began. Though, it was actually Kakashi that told me about you. If I'm not mistaken, you're Tenzo, correct? Tenzo let out an embarrassed chuckle. His name was a complicated subject, but Kakashi always referred to him as Tenzo. So much so, that it kind of stuck. Yes. Call me Tenzo, was the Anbu elite's response. Would you mind accompanying us back to the land of waves? Why, we should be heading back to the Leafville. It's for Naruto. If those other two are still somehow alive, he would want me to make sure that they were okay. Tenzo paused, unsure of what to do. The Hokage had instructed him to return Naruto to the village immediately if something bad had happened. But, did that give him the authority to disagree with another Sannin? Even if it did, he couldn't do it. If Jiraiya wanted to do something, there was nothing he would be able to do to stop him anyway. Tenzo simply nodded his agreeance. Okay. Jiraiya began. Let's go. They were approaching the Great Naruto Bridge. The entire trip up until this point had been silent between the two shinobi. Jiraiya was too busy worrying about the child on his back to make small talk conversation, and Tenzo wasn't much of a talker anyway. No. Jiraiya stopped and looked over his shoulder. Naru. No. Naruto was beginning to become restless, despite his eyes remaining shut. Please don't hurt them. His voice was pleading. Naruto. He placed his student down on the bridge, lightly shaking him. It's okay. Everything is okay. He didn't know what to do. How could he make his student feel better? After tragically losing 3 important people, what could someone say that would make it hurt less? Not it's not. He was sobbing lightly now, eyes still closed. They're dead. They're all dead. The sage was silent, racking his brain to try and find a way to calm his pupil down. It's my fault. Sobbing and sniffling of the child was growing even louder. If it wasn't for me being here, they would still be alive. It isn't your fault, Naruto. His voice was genuine. If it's anyone's fault, it's mine. I should have realized that this was an Akatsuki trap. I failed you. The emotions he was seeing the young blonde struggle with were breaking his heart. No, it's my fault. I can't protect anyone precious to me. He lamented through his choked speech. Oh old man third, Sasuke, Inari, Tsunami, Tazuna, he clutched his chest tightly where his heart was, a searing hot pain washing over him. I don't deserve to have this bridge named after me. I'm pathetic. Naruto. Jiraiya was at a loss for words. He desperately wished for Minato and Kushina's wisdom as parents. I have no real family, and I barely have any of my precious people left. It was true. All he had left was Kakashi, Sakura, and Jiraiya. That's not true. I'm your family. This wasn't something he ever thought he was going to say. Should he say it? The Sannin still wasn't sure if it was a smart thing to do. But Naruto needed to hear it. It could be the only thing that could stop this downward spiral that he was going on. The blonde needed to know why he cared for him as much as he did. Naruto's eyes opened. Filled with tears, he looked up at his teacher. What do you mean? I was very close to your father. He scratched the back of his head, still unsure if he should utter these next words. And he made me your godfather. He did his best to smile brightly to show Naruto that he wasn't alone like he thought he was. The boy's eyes widened. He was speechless, barely able to process what the older man had just said. Was it true? Why do you think I took so much of an interest in you? Or why I'm trying my best to make sure you become as strong as possible? For the Leaf's militaristic interests? No, it's because you're my family and I care about you deeply. The man's words were completely genuine. He had thought of the 4th Hokage as the son he had always wanted. The instant he had learned he would be the godfather to Naruto, those feelings carried over to him, as well. Family. He repeated that one word in a low whisper. While the deaths of his friends still had unforeseen effects on the genin, he was no longer shedding tears. Noticing this, Jiraiya put his hand out for Naruto to grab. Now get up. We have to check on your friends in the village. The vessel of the Nine Tails stared at the hand for a moment, but then grabbed it and pulled himself to his feet. Not saying anything, he just began to walk towards the house of the now deceased bridge builder. I have to watch him carefully. He's showing signs of psychological trauma. The white-haired ninja thought to himself worriedly. Who knows what kind of lasting effects this could have on his mind. They continued on in silence to where the tragedy had taken place. Bodies everywhere. The smell of smoke filled the air. The explosion, probably instigated by one of the Akatsuki members' attacks, appeared to have instantly killed everyone that had been in close proximity, including the 2 Anbu that had initially confronted them. The rest of the town seems to have evacuated. Jiraiya said aloud, hoping any amount of minuscule good news could cheer his godson up. Still, this looks like it was a high-traffic area. We're looking at about 50 civilian casualties. He kept that last bit of information to himself. Only monsters could inflict this kind of damage without a second thought. A perfect example of why the Akatsuki needed to be taken down. Naruto, face expressionless, walked past all of the charred corpses that littered the street, not even glancing in their general direction. Getting closer to the house, eyes fell on the body of Tazuna. His vacant stare was the polar opposite of what he had been like earlier. After a long pause, he walked past the decapitated bridge builder, into the house that he had once felt at home in. The two Jonin followed behind him but didn't say anything. The boy didn't need any distractions right now. The three ninjas thoroughly checked every room in the damaged house. The bodies of the other two were nowhere to be found. Yet, the kitchen floors were painted with blood. This blood is still somewhat wet, but there's no trail. The sage was stumped. It's as if they disappeared. The blonde stared blankly at the bloodstains, his face unreadable. Jiraiya, unsure of what his student was thinking, remained quiet for the time being. I can't even give them a proper burial. Naruto finally stated, his voice bone-chillingly monotonous. Why do people do things like this? The broken boy asked. Jiraiya, unsure if the question was rhetorical or not, decided to answer it anyway. This world we live in has way too much hate in it. Too much hate? Naruto asked, but didn't take his eyes off the blood coating the floor. Jiraiya walked to his godson's side, nodding somberly. People are driven by hatred, so much so that they will do unspeakable things to their fellow people. I've always wanted to do something about all of this hate. What could you do? Jiraiya sighed lightly. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I don't have the answer right now, but I truly believe that there will come a day where all human beings will understand one another and live in harmony. Naruto remained silent. Maybe if I can't figure out what to do, I'll entrust you to find that answer for me, Naruto. I don't think that's possible. All he thought of were the sadistic Akatsuki duo. From what he had gathered, they only had two targets. Himself and Tazuna. Yet, they killed dozens of innocent people. Not only that, but they appeared to have enjoyed causing all of this death and chaos. If there were people like that in this world cursed by hatred, would there come a day where everyone would live in harmony? The blonde couldn't see how that was feasible. Not after what he just saw. Well, what do you think we should do? There was a brief moment of silence, as Naruto seemed to mull over his mentor's words. Finally, he decided. If we just snuff out all of that hatred, no more innocent people would have to die like this. Wouldn't that solve all of our problems? They traded a glance that told the sage more than words could ever. Naruto was finally beginning to understand the horrors of the world. The only problem was, having seen those horrors firsthand at such a young age, how would that change his future? Author's note. The tone shift in this chapter is a drastic, but necessary one considering everything that has happened. While I won't be abandoning humor in this FIC, this is by no means a lighthearted, funny series. I'm aiming for something more serious and impactful. Leave your reviews and I'll make sure Chapter 10 is out in under 2 weeks. Your words are my motivation. The omake will wrap up either after Chapter 10 or Chapter 11, I have to see how it plays out. I will let you know in the author's note of the next chapter. Thanks for reading. Let me know what you think. Deniswanheda. I assume that there are other who expected Naruto to access the Nine Tails chakra. The reason why that didn't happen will be addressed later, so don't worry. As for Naruto resigning himself, I've made it a point of emphasis throughout the story that Naruto has been struggling with all the pressure mounting on his shoulders. The sudden death of those in Wave completes a string of very recent devastating losses that Naruto has gone through: Third Hokage, Sasuke, Inari, Tsunami, Tazuna. That, coupled with not getting any Fox chakra to fuel his rage, led to what you saw. Naruto knelt in front of the graves, reciting a prayer that wishes good fortune to his friends now in the afterlife. Though there was only one body, he thought of all three of them. Opening his eyes, looking next to the freshly dug up dirt, there were two others he knew all too well. He had buried Tazuna next to Zabuza and Haku. How ironic, he thought to himself humorlessly. How the contracted killer and the man he was hired to kill would share the same eternal resting place. Despite that thought, the blonde knew that in the end, Zabuza was a good person. That's why he felt that it was appropriate that all three of them should be next to one another. They were all good people who died because they got caught up in a bad situation. Rest peacefully. I'm sorry for my weakness. How are you feeling, Naruto? The sage asked him from behind. Naruto stood up slowly, lightly dusting the dirt off of the front of his pants. I think I feel a little better. He answered with an even tone. They deserved better, though. I know. Jiraiya agreed somberly. Silence reigned over them for a few moments. The blonde had been wanting to ask his godfather a question since he had found out about it, but he never figured out a good way to bring it up. Finally, he decided he would just go ahead and ask. Why didn't you tell me that you were my godfather when we first met? Or, even, before that. His tone wasn't accusing, he was just curious about the whole situation. Never once did he stop and think why an insanely powerful ninja like Jiraiya was interested in being around him as much as he was. The boy was just happy there was someone strong around that was willing to teach him cool jutsu. Looking back on it, the only reason that it would make sense is if the sage and he had some sort of bond he wasn't aware of. Jiraiya let out a long sigh, signaling his discomfort with the topic. It's complicated. He began with an unusually serious tone. I never had what it takes to be a father. If you had someone like me as a father figure, who knows how you would have turned out. The Sannin was being uncharacteristically hard on himself. If you had turned out a failure like me, because of me, I would never be able to face your father. Naruto frowned at his mentor's self-deprecating words. Well, I don't care what you think, you're not a failure and I wouldn't trade you for anyone. Jiraiya smiled, touched by his student's unexpectedly kind words. You aren't mad at me. I don't think so. The boy said slowly as he tried to sort through the things he was feeling. I may not have known you for very long, but I know that you usually have a good reason for the things that you do. I do feel guilty about not being there for you. If you want to hate me, I wouldn't blame you. There was a hint of sadness in his voice. It was tough, living in a village by myself where everyone hated me and wanted me gone. I know, Naruto. I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes have made things much more difficult on you. Speaking from the heart wasn't something the Toad Sage did often. From now on, I'll be better. I promise. Instead of anger or sadness, the boy smiled slightly. I forgive you. I'm just happy that I actually have a real family. He thought for a moment. Well, kind of. It's just you and me, but still. Thanks, kid. No problem, ya big perv. Jiraiya's sweat dropped. Guess that'll never change, he thought to himself with a laugh. There was something else Naruto desperately wanted to know. Since Jiraiya was his godfather, that meant that he knew his parents. But, while he wanted to hear every little detail about his parents, he was hesitant to ask about them. They had had a close relationship, meaning there was a good chance that asking about them would reopen a wound that his teacher wasn't ready for. So, out of respect, he would wait for Jiraiya to bring it up. When he was ready to do so, Naruto looked at the two Jonin that were accompanying him. What do we do now? He asked. As if by fate, a team of Leaf Anbu converged on the scene. Master Jiraiya, Bor began in a deep voice. We need to debrief all three of you on what transpired. Jiraiya waved him off. Sorry, but we can't. You can debrief Tenzo, but Naruto and I aren't staying long. He countered casually. The Anbu team, Tenzo included, seemed slightly taken aback by his response. Sir, we're under strict orders to not only debrief you three but to ensure Naruto returns safely to the village immediately. Jiraiya's and Naruto's ears perked at that last part. Are those Tsunade's orders? He asked, despite having a hunch he already knew the answer. The masked ninja shifted uncomfortably. No, not exactly, sir. The reluctant answer caught both of their attention. Though he didn't seem like it, Naruto was listening intently to this conversation. If she didn't give that order, then who did? Danzo. Jiraiya inwardly sneered. He was hoping that rat wouldn't have gotten word of what happened. Danzo was one of the people who opposed him taking his godson out of the village for an extended period. He had even gone so far as to convince the other higher-ups that their precious military weapon was safer inside the village, where they could watch him vigilantly. They would have to kill the Sannin if they planned on keeping his student locked up like one of Orochimaru's test subjects. Luckily for him, Tsunade had his back throughout the whole ordeal. Though, her power only extends so far. Once the elders had found out that Naruto was almost stolen away by the Akatsuki a second time, she probably lost all of her authority on the matter. I'll send a report to Tsunade, don't worry. He stated calmly. However, Naruto and I won't be returning to the village yet. Bor cleared his throat. With all due respect, due to what happened, the boy can no longer be allowed to freely walk outside the walls of the village. Naruto's eyes narrowed menacingly. So I'm just a weapon to all of you. He nearly spat at the Black Ops. They don't care about my life at all, they just don't want to lose the 9 tails. He was boiling over in rage. Now that he experienced it firsthand, he could see more and more clearly what human nature was truly like. Jiraiya, too, was beginning to lose his temper. You can tell the elders that he's not some dog that needs to be locked in a cage. The kid is safe with me, I'm not going to leave his side again. The sage stated with finality. He was fully aware that they weren't going to try and take his student by force. They hadn't brought nearly enough Anbu for that. I'll let them know, sir. Reluctance evidence in his tone. Despite their disagreement, the Anbu bowed professionally, and with the company of Tenzo, turned around to go back to the village. Thank you, Naruto said with some of the first emotion his mentor had heard from him all day. I already told you, we're family. As long as I'm alive they aren't going to treat you like some weapon. He gave his pupil a reassuring thumbs up. Naruto gave him a weak smile in return. At least somehow treated him like he was a human being. Where are we headed to now? The genin asked, trying his best to move past what had just happened. Funny you should ask that. The older man responded while biting his thumb. I think instead of just telling you, I'll show you. Naruto's eyebrow rose in intrigue, but he said nothing. Summoning jutsu, the Toad Master exclaimed, after running through a series of hand signs. Poof. Yo, what's up? The tiny red toad Gamakichi greeted with a half-lazy wave as the smoke began to clear. Hey, can you let them know that Naruto and I are coming in for a visit? Jiraiya asked the Toad Chief's son. Gamakichi's eyes lit up at the thought of his blonde friend coming to visit his home. Really? Sure thing. He looked over at Naruto. I'll see you soon, Naruto. That was followed by a soft, poof. The blonde boy just looked confused. What was that all about? He wasn't sure what was going on. He said he'd see me soon, even though he was already here. Just wait, you'll see. There a brief bit of silence, which annoyed Naruto. He disliked being out of the loop. What are we waiting f? Poof. The two-leaf ninja disappeared in a plume of smoke. Poof. Whoa. The blonde groaned, bringing a hand up to clutch his now pounding head. What just happened? He asked, doing his best to regain his bearings. What just happened was a reverse summon. Came an old-sounding voice. Naruto blinked. Wherever he was, it was not the land of waves. This new place had beautiful, colorful, and lush plant life, enormous mushrooms as tall as trees, large stone frogs with water spewing from their agape mouths. It was awe-inspiring. Where am I? This is Mount Myoboku, Naruto boy. The polite voice chimed in again. There was that voice again. He swirled around in the direction it had come from. Only no one was there. Down here, looking down, the genin saw a tiny, green toad, no taller than a couple of feet high. The toad had a tuft of white hair styled in what appeared to be a mohawk, very thick eyebrows, and a small goatee of the same color. The boy was at a loss. Naruto. Jiraiya began, gesturing to the tiny animal who had just been talking. This is Lord Fukasaku. He's one of my masters. Jiraiya leaned down to whisper in the green toad's ear. Give him a minute, he's a bit slow. Fukasaku chuckled warmly at his young guest. It's true. I taught Jiraiya boy almost everything he knows. The aforementioned student coughed loudly in protest, but it was ignored. And we did a lot of that teaching here. Gesturing to their current surroundings. This is my home, the home of all summoning toads. Mount Myoboku. The old toad explained slowly. As Naruto was trying to process all of this brand new information, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. Naruto. Gamakichi yelled as he hopped over. I told you I would see you again. So what do you think of my home? Pretty great, right? Yeah. The blonde nodded his agreement. This place is beautiful. Kichi boy, Why don't you show Naruto boy around? I have some catching up to do with my old student. The young toad nodded in understanding. You heard M. Let me show you around, Naruto. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Jiraiya added in. We'll be right here waiting for you, kid. Naruto nodded and followed Gamakichi. Lord Fukasaku's eyes were trained on the Sanin student. So, the old toad began. Is that the one? The child of prophecy? Jiraiya leaned up against a tall tree-like mushroom and let out a loud, tired-sounding sigh. I think it's very possible, but every time I thought that, well, you know what's happened. His voice was laced with a touch of sadness. The powerful leaf ninja had trained many impressive ninjas. All of which are now dead. Fukasaku nodded knowingly. There is more than just that, isn't there? You wouldn't bring him here just for a visit. Did something happen recently? There were some things that happened. He said vaguely. The kid has a lot on his plate right now. I just want to make sure that, if he is the child of prophecy, when the time comes to make the critical selection, I make the right choice. Ah, so you're here to see him for guidance. To which his pupil nodded. But why bring Naruto boy here? With the Akatsuki out there, I can't leave his side. He grimaced, thinking of back in the village. And I don't trust the village elders if I were to leave him back in the leaf. I see. We'll probably be here for a while, boss. If that's okay. That question elicited a smile from his master. Of course, you're always welcome. I'm sure Ma will love to see ya again. And meet Naruto boy, as well. A wave of relief washed over the leaf's toad sage. While he knew he was always welcome with open arms in Mount Myoboku, being there and away from everything else that was happening was going to be good for both Naruto and him. Thanks, boss. Eat up, pa, Jiraiya boy, Naruto boy. Naruto gulped audibly, his face practically blue with discomfort. A loud, but very nice toad that Jiraiya called, ma'am, just placed several plates of bugs down on the dinner table that they were all sitting around. Fukasaku immediately began to dig in, making sounds of enjoyment with every bite. The blonde almost threw up when the green toad swallowed a beetle whole that was the size of Gamakichi's head. The genin's eyes began to comically bulge out of his head when even Jiraiya began to start eating. Thanks for the food, he thanked as he sunk his teeth into a dish of colorful-looking bugs. Upon seeing the shocked look of his student, Jiraiya leaned closer to him to whisper. You'll get a bit used to it eventually, trust me. He began. Besides, if you don't eat it, Ma will get mad. The warning fell partially on deaf ears. You want me to eat bugs? The student whispered back harshly. What happened to you wanting me to eat healthily? I'm a boy, not a frog. Is everything okay, dearies? Ma asked affectionately. Why yeah. Fukasaku's student replied. Naruto has just never had any of this food before. Oh, you'll love it. Pa chimed in. Ma here is an amazing cook. His wife blushed at the compliment. Naruto's stomach rumbled. He let out a deep sigh. I'm so hungry. He looked at the food, then at Jiraiya. A look the sage immediately understood. I never want to hear you complain when I eat ramen ever again. When he was sure neither of the toads was looking, he pinched the bridge of his nose with his index finger and thumb and began scarfing down everything on his plate. Crunch. He almost gagged. Not because of the taste, no. Even though the hold on his nose had dulled the senses of taste, some of the flavors still made their way through. The flavor was surprisingly not terrible, it was the texture of the food that made him want to vomit. It was crunchy on the outside and mushy in the middle, almost like he was eating, well, bugs. That's because he was eating bugs. The boy didn't know how yet, but his godfather was going to suffer for this. Someone had to. After shoving all of the bugs into his mouth at once, he slammed down a glass of water to wash them, and the taste, down his throat. The plate of frog food was now finished. Oh, he loved it. Fukasaku's wife said, admiring the swiftness in which the boy ate her cooking. I told you, Pa added. Yeah, Naruto lied, sweating from the strain the colorful insects had just put himself through. Great. So, Naruto boy, Pa began, how do you like our home? Naruto didn't answer for a few seconds, still coming to grips that he had just eaten frog food. It's really a beautiful place. His face scrunched up in deep thought. Though, it feels different somehow. Jiraiya's ears perked up. Different? How so? Voice attentive. I don't really know how to explain it. The confusion was evident in his tone of voice. It's just, the air feels different. If that makes any sense. Eyebrow now raised, the Sanin glanced over at the old toads at the other side of the table. Both looked mildly surprised that the kid appeared to already be sensing some levels of natural energy. It's a special place, was the simple explanation the blonde was given by his teacher. Naruto nodded. I can see that, not picking up the non-verbal communication that was happening between the other three. Kid. Jiraiya broke the boy away from his musing. A lot has happened, and for the time being we're gonna be staying here. The genin lowered his gaze. Understanding why Jiraiya was bringing it up was easy, but he was doing his best to try and forget what had happened in Wave. Thinking about it wouldn't do anyone any good. If you want, we can take a break from train. No. Naruto raised his gaze, locking eyes with his teacher. I'm ready. Words strong as steel. Jiraiya looked at him for what seemed like a long time. Was it a good idea to jump back into training so quickly? Jiraiya didn't know. He couldn't know. Everyone deals with hardship differently. Maybe the best thing would be to jump straight back into training. Besides, the Akatsuki weren't going to give them extra time. The boy needed to get stronger, as soon as possible. That was it. The decision was made. Okay. It's late, so we'll start back up first thing in the morning. Words eliciting a nod from the young student. Conversation between Ma and Pa resuming, the sage tried to tune it out and focus on the serenity of Mount Myoboku. The soft chirping of the toad inhabitants could be heard from outside the kitchen window, sounding similar to the noises of the forests they had spent so much time in these past few months. Yet, it was calmer, more peaceful. Suddenly, a chill washed over his body. Eyes snapping open, focusing on the retreating form of his student who was headed off to bed. Hoping he had made the right choice, not just for his student's sake, but for the world. You're too weak. Naruto opened his eyes and sat up. No longer laying on the floor in the room the small toads, Jiraiya, and he was sharing. Strangely enough, the boy was sitting in his bed. What the hell is going on? Whatever it was, it felt off. Standing up, the blonde walked over to his window. Just as he was about to push it open, the floor beneath him began to rumble. Whoa, what the? Stumbling about, just managing to open them up. His eyes widened in horror. This really was the Leaf Village. And, the entire village was on fire. No, not again. The sharp, burning pain that had been in his chest earlier was creeping its way back. Instincts taking over, he leapt out of the window onto the ground outside of his apartment. Terrible screams could be heard in the distance. Screams that sounded familiar. Taking off in that direction, hopes growing dim about what he was about to see, the boy had only one thing running through his mind. Nothing like that can ever happen again. I won't let it. The horrible cries for help were getting closer. Leaping over a wooden fence, he arrived at the scene. Naruto, wait, you have to get out of here, now. It was Jiraiya, but, standing behind him were the two Akatsuki members that had crushed the land of waves. They had a kunai to his throat. Littered around them were bodies. More specifically, the bodies of his friends. Sakura, Kakashi, Iruka, Kiba, Shino, Hinata, Shikamaru, Choji, Ino, Lee, Neji, Tenten. They were all dead, throats slashed. Naruto remained still, heart caught in his throat. Not again, this couldn't be happening again. It didn't make any sense, he shouldn't be here right now. The Akatsuki, they shouldn't be here either. Tears began to freely run down the now alone boy's cheek, but a sound did not escape his lips. That was it. Despite not having much left to begin with, they had taken everything he had remaining from him. Why is there happening to me? Kakuzu smiled sinisterly behind his dark-colored mask. Because, you're too weak. The sharp kunai was dragged harshly across the throat of his mentor. No. Naruto awoke in a cold sweat, tears streaming down his cheeks. Heart beating furiously in his chest. Looking to the left, Jiraiya was there sleeping peacefully on his side. To the right, Lord Fukasaku and the female toad he later learned was named Lady Shima were still passed out, as well. Realizing, he was no longer in the leaf, but back in Mount Myoboku, his lips let out a shaky sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Toned down to a whisper. Unlike the last nightmare that occurred, Naruto could remember every detail upon waking up. Though, he desperately wished he couldn't. It was too painful. And those words, they rang painfully in his ears over and over. You're too weak. Gripping his chest tightly, he couldn't help but agree with those words. They were right after all, many precious people have died because he had been too weak to protect them. That was why training had to resume as soon as possible. Maybe with that training, no one close to him would have to die. No one at all would have to die. The strength to protect innocent people from harm. That was the goal. The only current issue. There was no way he would be getting any more sleep tonight. Naruto let out a long, obnoxious yawn that made his sensei twitch in annoyance. They had just made it to where they would be training in what Naruto would affectionately describe as Toad Land. It was an open area away from where the toads lived, though you wouldn't be able to tell by just glancing at it. They were still surrounded by tall mushrooms, and colorful foliage as far as the eye could see. It was nice and spacious, perfect for training. Tired, kid? He asked, confused. You went to bed even earlier than I did. How are you tired? Oh, the blonde scratched the back of his head nervously. If Jiraiya knew about what had happened last night, then there was a good chance their training would be postponed. After all, a big emphasis was put on whether or not he could handle intense training after the land if waves incident. Ya see, I woke up super early in the morning to pee, but then I couldn't get myself to go back to sleep. Don't ya hate when that happens? He lied. Jiraiya nodded knowingly, accepting the lie. Now that the blonde had mentioned it, Naruto had already been awake by the time he had gotten up. Just try not to fall asleep on me. Today is really important for your training. This elicited a swift nod from his pupil. Good. Jiraiya reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. You probably remember me showing you something like this, he said, flipping the page around so his student could look. It was similar to what he had shown him a few months ago when they were in the early stages of training. Again, each of the 7 days of the week was written out on the paper, Monday through Sunday. Each of those days when then enclosed by a shape, that shape indicated what type of training they would be doing on that specific day of the week. A way to simplify the layout of the training regimen enough where even Naruto could understand it. This time around, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday were enclosed by a triangle, Wednesday and Sunday were contained by a square, and Monday and Friday were circled. Already knowing that squares meant taijutsu and circles were for weighted training, the blonde only had one question on his mind. So, what do the triangles stand for? Today was Thursday, so whatever the triangle meant is what they were going to do. Simple. Ninjutsu. The sage explained, toothy grin ever present. Naruto sat quietly, urging his instructor to continue with a knowing look. Jiraiya frowned. I thought you would be more excited than this, Naruto. The boy's face was nearly stoic. I am, it's just a little difficult for me to show it right now. He forced himself to smile, though to Jiraiya it just looked like he was in pain. The sage winced at his words. I'm so stupid, mentally berating himself. Being more careful with words was a key point Fukasaku and Shima had mentioned to him last night after Naruto had gone off to bed. What ninjutsu are we going to be working on? The boy asked, trying to change the subject for his, and his master's, sake. Well, if you remember, I had asked you to work on your Rasengan a while back. Being able to perform a Rasengan with just a single hand will make it a much more useful attack when in battle. The boy nodded his agreeance. There was just one problem. I have been trying for a while, but it's just too hard. At this rate, I'm going to spend all of the time we have for ninjutsu just to learn how to do a proper Rasengan. Jiraiya smiled. When talking about jutsu and getting stronger, a tiny bit of that sparkle returned to his pupil's eyes. It wasn't ideal, but it was an improvement, nonetheless. Jiraiya held up a finger knowingly. Funny you should mention that. Smirk fit perfectly to his face. I had a hunch that this could be a problem, and I had been thinking about a way around it. What the hell are you talking about, sensei? The genin retorted, eyes squinted in confusion. You know how you used your clones to read all of those books so quickly. This registered a nod from his godson. Well, do you know how you were able to do that? Well, yeah, you said that the clones' memories and experiences transferred themselves to me after they are dispelled. This was confusing. What did that have to do with anything? Well, If you can take the knowledge and memories of your clones, then there's a chance we could use that to help you learn jutsu faster. Naruto's eyes widened at this revelation, but before he could say anything, Jiraiya continued to explain. If a group of you and 4 clones practice a jutsu with you, there's a chance that their experience could transfer to you and you'll be able to learn that technique 5 times faster than you normally would be able to. In theory, at least. It most likely won't exactly be 5 times faster, but it would be faster than just you alone. That's amazing, the blonde exclaimed, reclaiming a bit of his trademark enthusiasm. If this is possible, why don't I just make 100 clones? That way I'll learn jutsu super fast. This was it. He was going to be strong in no time. The white-haired sage held up a hand in protest. Not so fast, kid. Tone firm, but not harsh. Don't you remember what happened when you used only a handful of clones? Naruto winced, remembering the aftermath of an extra-long reading session with only 11 clones. He had passed out, and lying wasn't an option because his mentor had been there to wake him up. Your mind isn't developed enough to safely handle that amount of stress, he informed. Especially after everything that has happened, I can't risk straining him any more than he already has been. The Jonin added mentally, we're going to take this slow. Finishing aloud. The Jinchuriki huffed but did not resist his godfather's instructions. I guess, knowing full well his guardian was right. Besides, you're not going to be only doing ninjutsu on ninjutsu days, he vaguely informed. Head Ed comically to the side in confusion. What do you mean? What else am I gonna be doing? Jiraiya smirked and grabbed a book from one of his bags. Every day, one of your clones is going to be taken aside to read things like this. Jiraiya tossed a book at the blonde. The blonde caught it easily, reading the title with a curious look. Fuinjutsu. The Sealing Arts for Beginners. Eyebrow fully raised. Fuinjutsu. This sounds familiar. Where had he heard that? Your weights, he began, pointing to the weights strapped to the young boy's limbs. I make them heavier by pumping chakra into the seals that I drew on them. When activated with my chakra, those written seals alter the intensity of the downward force of whatever is written on them. I was always meaning to ask you, why doesn't everyone use seals like these to get stronger? Jiraiya grinned proudly. Well, it just so happens that you're looking at one of the few great seal masters left in the world. The narcissism Naruto saw radiating off of his godfather was practically palpable. At least you're good at something besides perving. Had to knock him back down a peg. The self-proclaimed super pervert shook his head, unfazed by his pupil's words. They were getting off topic. The seal on your stomach, as well. Jiraiya continued, pointing at the boy's midsection. The 9-tailed fox was sealed away inside you with an advanced form of Fuinjutsu. He watched as the boy gripped his stomach tightly on instinct. Fuinjutsu has more uses than just sealing things away or into other things. It can be used to create barriers, contract seals, block the flow of chakra, restrict people's movements, and many other things. The potential of this art is only limited by the knowledge, creativity, and skill of the user. Seems like something that can be very useful. The blonde mused as he flipped through the book he was given. Had this been a few months ago, Naruto wouldn't even attempt to read a book like this. Now, though, he was more open to reading. Reading was something he enjoyed doing, as unbelievable as it sounded. Exactly. If you can learn how to utilize it, it will be a valuable tool in your arsenal. Jiraiya concluded. After all, with his natural creativity, his parents' affinities for sealing, and my guidance, this kid has the potential to become one of the greatest seal masters we've ever seen. That would definitely be something that Naruto would not be hearing. The genin was known for letting praise go to his head sometimes. That's another reason I can't have too many clones, right? Naruto questioned. If it was just the ninjutsu, I might be able to get away with using more clones. But because my focus will be divided between ninjutsu and fuinjutsu, it could potentially put even more strain on my mind. That's right. Surprised that the blonde was able to extrapolate that key fact from their conversation. So, how many clones do you want me to make? The Sannin thought for a moment, bringing a hand to his chin. After a moment of contemplation, he decided. I would say, for now, 1 clone for reading and 4 for ninjutsu, 5 in all. A sharp nod was followed by hands swinging up to form the unique seal for shadow clones. Shadow Clone Jutsu. was followed by 5 plumes of smoke. Several hours had passed. The genin was panting heavily as he brought his hand up to slightly below shoulder level once again, palm facing upwards. The ridges of the palm were scuffed up from chakra burns. The day had consisted of the clones in him forming their respective Rasengans, doing their best to tighten the rotation of the jutsu, and the original having his jutsu blow up in his face. Jiraiya had made it clear that the clones shouldn't be condensing their Rasengans too much. That way they didn't get constantly dispelled from explosions all day, thus saving precious chakra while also still getting valuable experience. Though, it was beginning to get a little frustrating. No progress was being made. Running a hand through singed hair once again, he sighed and began to form chakra in his palm once more. Wait, Naruto. What? The boy responded grumpily. He didn't want to talk to anyone right now, not after getting blown up the entire day. It wasn't fun. Dispel your clones. Naruto gave a confused look but obliged anyway. There was usually a method to the perv's madness. Poof. The Sannin watched his student carefully. After dispelling the technique, the world began to spin a little. Stumbling a little, the original orange-clad ninja did his best to maintain balance. After a few moments, the sensation went away, and he was able to take in the experiences that all of the clones had gathered. Though, they had left the clone that was reading. Jiraiya had said that it probably wasn't a good idea to simultaneously dispel clones that were doing 2 different things for a long period of time. Taking in all of that differing information might be too much for him as of right now. Maybe after getting used to the sensation it wouldn't matter as much, but right now it was better to be safe than sorry. Slowly, the pieces of the training were falling into the appropriate places. How do you feel? Jiraiya asked cautiously. It didn't appear the effects of the training were harmful, but being completely sure was something that had to be done. I feel good. Naruto replied honestly. It pained him to admit it, but his mentor had been right. Though it wasn't severe by any means, 4 clones had more of an effect that he had anticipated. If they had done it the way the blonde wanted, let's just say passing out again was extremely likely. Good. Now try the Rasengan again. Okay. The boy responded closely, not expecting this result to be any different. Getting into a balanced stance, he brought his palm up and began to gather chakra. Taking it slowly, the chakra began to spin faster and faster. Once it reached a speed that was deemed acceptable, the focus shifted to increasing power by condensing the chakra down into a super tight ball. Little by little, the ball got smaller, while still maintaining the rotational speed. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. Whoa, this is the farthest I've ever gotten. Boom. Being surprised by the rapid improvement, the trainee lost focus and the result was a destabilized Rasengan explosion. Oof. Naruto yelped as he was thrown to the ground by the force. Jiraiya let out a bark of laughter but was nonetheless very pleased with the fruits of his student's labor. It appeared to have positive effects after all. How did that feel, Gaki? Do you think training with the clones helped you at all? Definitely, was the joyful response as the pupil picked himself off of the ground. It still needs a ton more practice, but that is honestly the only progress I've made on the Rasengan in a long time. That's great, Jiraiya explained. You know, now that we're done with training today, we should celebrate a little. Naruto was interested. Really? How? Jiraiya just smirked and pulled out a scroll from his sleeve that had a symbol on it that the blonde now recognized. Hey, I know what that is. That's a storage seal, right? The boy stopped for a moment. Wait, how do I know that? Glancing over at where the scholarly clone had been sitting, they noticed that it was no longer there. During the explosion it must have either gotten caught up in the blast or accidentally dispelled by a distracted Naruto. After realizing what had happened, the both quickly recovered. That's right. Good job, kid. His sensei responded proudly. Looks like you're retaining what you're reading pretty well, huh? He. Naruto laughed as he put his arms behind his head in his trademark pose. It made Jiraiya so happy to see him like that again, even just for a split second. But what's more important is what's sealed inside. Naruto watched curiously as his mentor undid the seal to release. Instant ramen. Tears began to form at the corner of his eyes. This truly was a beautiful moment. After all of the bugs he had been eating the past 2 days, he needed some ramen in his life. You're the best. Don't expect this every time, Gaki. You deserve a treat, but it won't be very often. Yes, sir. The Anbu, after a long bit of traveling north, finally arrived in the village hidden in hot water. After being shut down by Jiraiya of the Sanin, they had decided to split into two groups. One group would go back to the village and inform the Hokage and the elders of Jiraiya's defiance, and the others would retrieve the man who was granted asylum to protect him from the Akatsuki after he assisted Jiraiya. The group of 8 was now 4, not including Yamato as he also had returned to the Leaf. This group was now split into two groups of 2. While the others were busy retrieving the newest member of the village, the second group were to examine the house of the now dead informant neighbor, Naki. If Jiraiya wasn't going to relay any information to the elders, only Tsunade, then it was their job to do that. That is if they could even find anything noteworthy. Knock knock. Please open the door. We are here to take you to the Hidden Leaf village by way of the 5th Hokage, Tsunade-sama. They waited for a response, but after a couple of moments, there still hadn't been a response. The attending Anbu sighed but maintained his professional demeanor. Sir, I know that you are probably scared, but we are allies of the man who had been here a few days ago. The one you helped, we would like to return that kindness. This time, the ninja could discern some soft sounds coming from behind the door that sounded like walking. Sure enough, a few seconds later the door made a soft click, and it opened up to reveal the same man that Jiraiya had met. Bald, middle-aged, and with a thick beard. Though he was hiding partially behind the door so not all of his body could be seen. Finally, you came. He sounded overjoyed by the arrival of the nice shinobi. I was scared they were going to come back for me. Don't worry, the Anbu reassured. You'll be safe behind the walls of the Leaf. The old gentleman nodded vigorously in agreement. Thank you very much. The two that had been searching through Naki's house, now done with their task, regrouped with the others. There wasn't any information in there that Danzo would find useful. Tone even, but with a hint of disappointment. The others nodded, looking back to their escort. We should be leaving now. Are you ready? Do you have everything that you need? Sure do, gesturing to the bag that had a strap hanging over his shoulder. I don't need to bring much, just the necessities. The name is Sozoku, by the way. We must inspect your personal items. It is protocol. To which Sozoku agreed willingly and handed over his belongings. One of the Anbu searched it thoroughly. He found it a bit odd that there appeared to be no sentimental items such as pictures or letters, but as long as there was nothing to harm Leaf villagers it wasn't important. All that was in there was food, water, and a bedroll for sleeping during the long trip. The Jonin nodded and handed back the bag. The 4-Leaf elite nodded, happy that they would finally be able to return home after this ordeal. Then let us go. The man nodded, and walked out of his house on his crutches to follow them. The Anbu, with their backs now turned to the man, were unable to see his face contort into a smug smirk. Sakura. Sakura closed the book that was now resting on her lap as a long sigh escaped her lips. Many thoughts were running through her mind, and she didn't know how to process all of them. After about 3 days of reading the newly purchased book, it was finally finished. If she was being honest, the expectations for her teammates' book were low. I mean, how could they not be? The Naruto that she knew barely passed the academic portions of the academy. Or, at least, that was what she, the pink-haired girl, had assumed. Because wow, this book was good. In fact, good may have been an understatement. It was great. Not only was it well written, which was the biggest surprise of all, but it also made her feel some emotions that she hadn't been prepared to feel. Sakura was aware that Naruto had grown up all by himself, but not until now did she truly know what the boy had been going through all of these years. All of that was conveyed through the main character, Menma, which was a result of Naruto projecting himself into his work. I always saw him with that annoying large smile on his face, the Kunoichi thought with a twinge of sadness. I always just assumed he was happy, but he was just sad and lonely. She did her best to try and shake those sympathetic thoughts from her head. Naruto wouldn't want her to feel that way about him. After all, this wasn't a sad book about a despairing main character, it was a story of a man who gets all of the adversity in the world thrown at him, only for him to try his damnedest to overcome it and grow as a human. If anything, Sakura should be proud of Naruto, not sad for him. Never once had she heard the boy complain about anything in his life. Sure, He would sometimes get frustrated or upset when things didn't go his way, but that's natural for everyone. The truth was, her blonde teammate was one of the strongest people she had ever met. And Sakura wasn't talking about battle strength, though Naruto was very strong in that regard, too. No, character was the greatest strength he possessed. No matter what happened, who was in his way, or how hopeless the situation was, Naruto was going to give it everything he had. That was who Naruto Uzumaki was. She clenched her fist tightly, a new fire burning brightly behind those green eyes. I'm not going to let you get that far ahead of me, Naruto. I'm going to train my butt off today, and every day, with Tsunade-sama until you get back. Just you wait. Hinata. When the Hyuga heiress had learned that the boy she had always admired had come out with a book that she would be able to read, words could not describe how happy she was. She felt this way for many reasons. Not only did she want to support her fellow Leaf Ninja as much as she could, but reading something that was written by him also helped dull pain in her chest that had been intermittently present ever since the boy had left with Jiraiya of the Sannin. Hinata didn't know why the pain was there, but it would flare up whenever her mind drifted to thinking about Naruto. Most importantly, though, the novel allowed her to peer into the mind of its author. Not being much of a writer herself, it was still common knowledge that an author tends to show some of their thoughts and feelings through the work they create. In short, maybe reading this book would be able to help her be in tune with whatever her crush was feeling. Well, she read the whole thing. Quite quickly, in fact. After purchasing the novel, she rushed home back to the Hyuga compound and began reading immediately. Reading the entire day, then that entire night, she finished around lunchtime the following morning. Letting out a tired yawn, pale eyes were fixated on the cover of the book. It was just like him, very orange. Normally Hinata would have smiled, but conflicting feelings were getting in the way of it. The contents of the book were something she had not expected. From what she knew about Naruto, he was someone very strong and determined. Someone who, no matter what was in his way, he was going to fight tooth and nail to succeed. Hinata had seen him do it after all, at the first stage of the Chunin exams. Naruto did what he did best and didn't give up, and even though he didn't appear to notice, he inspired a lot of Chunin hopefuls to do the same thing that day. One of them was her. That is what had her so conflicted. Menma, the protagonist, was nothing like the Naruto she knew. At least, not at first. The main character was lonely, self-conscious, and emotionally wounded. Three things that she would never associate with Naruto. Only later, after much struggling and self-reflection, did Menma begin to resemble the blonde boy Hinata had learned to admire so deeply. That's when the realization hit her. Having been so enthralled by the pristine perception of Naruto that she had, it never crossed her mind that this was what he was like before, and maybe still like, to some degree. Tears began forming in the corner of her lavender eyes as he began to think back to that cold day in the woods when those bullies were trying to pick on her. Naruto had saved her and had gotten beaten up badly in the process. Then, she had been dragged away unable to even so much as thank her savior. At that time, was he feeling the way Menma felt? Alone, worthless. The possibility of that being true was tearing her up inside. If she had known back then, maybe she would have acted differently. Hinata hoped that that was the case, but she wasn't sure. Growing up shy and scared, the desire to get closer to Naruto was there. The girl could just never bring herself to do it no matter how hard she tried. It broke the heiress's heart that the boy she wanted nothing more than to stand at his side had been going through so much while she was too scared to even say, "Hi. I'm so pathetic," harsh words echoed in the ears of the shy member of Team 8. I don't quit, and I don't run. Since the Chunin exams, every time Hinata was scared to do something those words came back to her memory. Naruto's words. Shaking her head free of all of those negative thoughts, Hinata steeled herself. Naruto was due to come back in 2 years. That gave her 2 years to become better. And when it was time for the blonde to come back, she would be ready to be there for him if he needed it, and he would take notice of her. Neji, the cousin to the main branch's heiress, a slave to the household, Neji's interest in Naruto and his novel was quite different from that of Hinata and Sakura. Neji was one of the few geniuses of his generation. A prodigy in the way of the gentle fist art that would be considered very rare even among the elite of the main branch of the clan. Yet, He was bested in combat by someone who he had deemed as inferior to him. So sure of his victory, the blonde's devastating uppercut did more than discombobulate Neji's senses, it turned his entire world upside down. There were many things that the caged Hyuga wanted to ask his former opponent, though he never got the chance to do so before he had left the village with the indecent Sanin. Well, more accurately, Neji had no idea how to bring them up in conversation. They had interacted verbally a bit during their mission to retrieve Sasuke, but nothing far beyond simple conversation and things about the mission. If he was being honest with himself, he wasn't a very sociable person. Nor did he like to show emotion, which would make talking to Naruto very difficult given the things he wants to discuss. So, what better way than to try and communicate with him through the words that he writes? Perhaps it would answer those burning questions. No matter how many days had passed since the final round of the Chunin exams, there was one line that constantly resonated with the talented shinobi. You don't know what it's like to be branded with a mark that sets you apart. A mark that can never be wiped away. Oh yeah, I know what that's like. Well, big deal. Who cares? Initially, those words had infuriated Neji. It seemed as though Naruto was trying to minimize what he had gone through with the death of his father and the unfair state of his clan. Yet, after looking back on it, that didn't seem to be the case. What had he meant by that? And then, what was that chakra the blonde was able to bring forth despite having his chakra points blocked? Neji hypothesized that Naruto's mark, that he said he also possessed and that swirling red chakra were somehow connected. After completing the novel, the Hyuga prodigy was even more sure of his theory than he had been before. The main character of the story was someone who was ostracized due to a power that he could not fully control. Having heard around the village, Naruto was not well received by many of the villagers, yet Neji hadn't heard why this was. Coupling this with the fact that this Menma grew and matured into someone who resembles Naruto in many ways, this could only make it even more likely that Naruto and the Hyuga are very alike. Both were branded with hideous marks that not only defined them but limited their possibilities. Or so, that was what he thought before clashing with the blonde. While Neji had been born with unmistakable talent, Naruto was not, and he still won. Immediately after the heated battle, the result dumbfounded Neji. How could he, the pride of the Leaf's most powerful clan, lose to someone with less talent and skill? Over time, after thinking about life and the words that were spoken to him on that day, he concluded. It was because Naruto refused to be bound by what was supposed to be his fate. By not accepting it, and choosing to fight past it, the boy had exceeded his limits and potential. It almost didn't seem real and went against the Hyuga boy's deeply entrenched beliefs about life and reality. Yet, it still made him believe that it was possible. Naruto inspired him to continue moving forward no matter what, and this book was just a projection of all the things that the blonde had unintentionally taught him. Neji unceremoniously cracked a smile. One day, the Hyuga branches would join together to form one clan. Then, and only then, will the curse mark of the branch families disappear for good and fade into history. Using Naruto's teachings, Neji would ensure that this happens. Tsunade. Tsunade grunted in a mix of annoyance and anger as she eyed the old badger sitting on the other side of the large Hokage desk. The last few days had been an absolute mess. After receiving the message from her childhood friend and teammate about the recent events in both Wave and the Land of Hot Water, she had been worried sick about the little genin. The only silver lining to the whole situation was that Naruto was safe and sound. Well, from what Jiraiya had said, physically safe. Mentally, that was a matter that had still yet to be determined, but she was praying that Naruto would come out of all of this no worse for wear. Now, while that whole situation was bad enough, there was also the matter of dealing with the person who was currently invading her personal space. For the last time, Tsunade's voice was its usual strict and firm tone. Even if I ordered Jiraiya to come back, he wouldn't. His job is to train the boy, and he can't do that when they are both in the village. We rely on Jiraiya too much when he's here, they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. How many times did she have to say it before he would understand? This is ridiculous, Princess Tsunade. You are the Hokage. Act like it for once and order your subordinate to return to the village at once. Danzo demanded, despite not having the actual power to do so. From what Jiraiya told me, he and Naruto are safe in MT. Myoboku and are planning on staying there for a majority of the time they have left before they are due back in the village. The slug princess's tone was getting harsher and harsher as this conversation continued. That should be acceptable, even for you. No, that is not good enough. The boy must be here in the village where we can watch him and make sure he does not get into trouble. Jiraiya has shown that he is incapable of ensuring the Jinchuriki's safety. I would do a much better job if I was just given the opportunity. This would not do. Not at all. If he had the seat of Hokage, the state of the village would be far better than it currently was. The other nations were beginning to view the Leaf as a weaker version of its former self. These perceptions invite conflict as the other countries vie to be at the top of the world. If only Tsunade realized that and gave up the seat to him willingly. Then, the village's most valuable asset would be safe and locked in a cage like it should be, thus helping them maintain their spot as the supreme ninja village. Jiraiya is one of the Sannin, and currently the strongest ninja we have. If anyone could keep Naruto safe, it is him. That remains to be seen. Jiraiya is the reason Naruto isn't in the hands of the Akatsuki, and it is not from a lack of trying. Danzo would be hard-pressed to argue with that. There were now 2 times when an Akatsuki duo tried to take the nine-tailed fox, and both were foiled by the presence of the Toad Sage. Though, one of those instances involved Itachi. The old badger sneered. He couldn't tell Tsunade about why the encounter with Itachi had less merit. Only 3 people know about that, and there was no way he was going to let more people in on that dark little secret. He had no choice but to relent for now. And, Danzo, this information, it is classified, it will not leave this room. The beautiful Senju's voice promised punishment if her words were ignored. Fine. The annoyance in his voice was palpable. Just know this, Princess Tsunade, if that boy falls into the hands of the Akatsuki, the world as we know it is doomed. So, you had better hope that fool Jiraiya knows what he's doing. Before the 5th Hokage could even respond, Danzo lifted himself off of the chair with his trusty cane and made his way for the door. Yet, suddenly, he stopped and turned around. From this position, he could see the entire office that always belonged to the incumbent Hokage. Even though Tsunade currently resided in that seat, he could see himself in her place. A faint smile adorning his wrinkled lips, the bandaged man closed the door behind him as he left. The female Sannin let out a deep, frustrated sigh. First, there had been stacks of paperwork that had to be dealt with, the annoying badger had to come in with his monthly power struggle that was beginning to grow tiresome. Though, this was one of the few times where Danzo had made some good points. If she didn't have the utmost respect and love for both Jiraiya and Naruto, perhaps Shimura's request would have been considered. I need a drink, muttering absent-mindedly to herself, she glanced at the orange book that was laying on the far right corner of her desk. Tsunade had been excited to read the book by her adoptive grandson, but there just wasn't enough time. Especially considering everything that had just happened, there wasn't enough time in the day to get everything done. What was it about? That was what made her so curious. The similarities the blonde had to Nawaki and Dan were probably what made her the most interested. Maybe she would see a little bit of them in it. Who knew? Tsunade-sama, Shizune said loudly as she walked through the door with a large stack of paper in her hands. All of these need to be completed by the end of the day. Her smile was a mask to hide her nervousness because the Hokage was already in a bad mood after meeting with the Leaf Village's leader of Root. More paperwork was just adding fuel to the fire. Tsunade's eyes drifted slowly from the book to her student, ushering her forward. She watched as Shizune plopped the papers down in front of her. Another sigh escaping the lips of the Sannin. Hopefully, I'll have time to start reading it tomorrow. She mused, though with little confidence that it was possible.